Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Meenal Dhal from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we'll discuss the module Land Alienation, the Extent and Causes from the paper Research Method and Fieldwork. As this module is more of focusing on the fieldwork. The learning objectives of this module are to understand the alienation and to understand the extent and causes of land alienation in India. It will also help you to understand how the state willingly or unwillingly takes part in the land alienation, and to understand the most of the causes of land alienation and how the unique interplay of causes and their interrelation which play against the marginalized. So let's start with the discussion of this what land alienation is. The word alienate means to make estranged or unfriendly. One of the dictionary, it defines it as the state of being an outsider or the feeling of being isolated from the society. Alienation is connected in the subject context of sociology, economics, psychology, political science, as well as philosophy. All contexts have the human being as their central protagonists. The alienation of land could be understood in two different contexts in law. When a society, culture, colonizer, or a state takes over the land of its original inhabitants, it is said that original inhabitants have been alienated from their lands. For example, for tribal lands, as per the guidelines of Government of India, sale and mortgage of lands to non-tribal people are considered as alienation of lands. Even leasing out lands against loan and non-tribal people are considered as alienation of lands, on the assumption that the tribals are unable to redeem their debts and get back their lands. The alienable land in property law is land that has the capacity to be transferred by mortgage or by deed. The property is generally deemed to be alienable by its owner unless there were restrictions placed on it when it was acquired. Therefore, in property law, mortgaging or selling real property is also called the alienation of land. Dashed in his social and cultural anthropology states that most of the tribes in India recognize two types of properties. The first one is private property, another one is personal property and community property. The cultivable land, pasture, ground, etc. belong to the community. The ordinary villager exercise unfructuately rights over these landed property. The ownership of the land is governed by a set of customary rights. The individual ownership is also predominant in certain regions of tribal India. Thus, Cochrane feels that the anthropologists are often placed in the role of honest broker between traditionalist property owner holder their land as a group and economically progressive individual wishing to lease, purchase or otherwise use these lands. Now the extent and causes of land alienation. The literature on tribals in India would reveal that one of the long-standing grievances has been the alienation of their land. The Ministry of Rural Development of the Government of India in its annual report of 2007 and 8 under the subheading Prevention of Alienation and restoration of alienated tribal land states that reports received from various states indicate that 5.06 lakh cases of tribal land alienation have been registered, covering 9.02 lakh acres of land, of which 2.25 lakh cases have been disposed of in favor of tribals, covering a total area of 5 lakh acres. 1.99 lakh cases covering an area of 4.11 lakh acres have been rejected by the court on various grounds. So the subsequent reports have no mention of the aforementioned subheading, and hence there is no way of knowing if the tribals received the land and if the rejected cases were appealed for in higher courts. Also, there is no way of knowing if any more land has been alienated. One of the scholar, Rupawath, in 2009 was of the opinion that land alienation among tribals is not a mere structuralist, legalist problem, but a much more deeply connected phenomenon full of contradictions related to the existing socio-economic order. Another scholar, Rao, in his paper on tribals of Andhra Pradesh, wrote that according to a report by the Department of Tribal Welfare, out of approximately a very major land area in the agency area, non-tribals hold 7.53 lakhs acre, that is about 48% of the land. The non-tribal holding 52% in Khammam district, 60% in Adilabad, 71% in Wrangle, and the same are the figures in the West Godavari district. The very presence of non-tribals owning lands in the scheduled area is proof of the systematic violation of the regulations made from the time to time governing the land transfer in agency areas. Corroborating the above, one of the scholars found that land alienation is more in areas easily accessible and having a high scope for mining, and has been a single biggest cause of the acute backwardness of the tribal economy, with a large part of the tribal population economically indigent and with alienation of their lands, and are reduced to the status of agricultural labor. Similarly, another scholar, quoting from official data, states that around 40% of 60 million people displaced following development projects in India are tribals, which is not a surprise given that 90% of our coal and more than 50% of most minerals and dam sites are mainly in the tribal regions. Since independence, recognizing land alienation as a major issue facing tribals, the Indian government and various state governments have passed a spate of laws and regulations to prevent land alienation for tribal lands. For example, the Assam Land and Revenue Regulation Amendment Act in 1964, Bihar Schedule Area Regulation in 1969, Land Revenue Rules 1960 of Karnataka are some of them, as are the Chota Nagpur Tendency Act of 1908, Santhal Pragna Tendency Act 1949, Land Acquisition Act 1894 and Schedule Area Regulation 1969 that governs the land rights, regulate the acquisition for public purpose and give Adivasi an executive protection from individual resource alienation in the Jharkhand. In spite of all these efforts, land alienation continues, and the scholars, they have researched so much, and one of the scholar in his research article clearly says that land alienation in Jharkhand categorizes land alienation under the 4 cross-cutting categories. The first category is the alienation in urban areas, that is primarily demand induced for housing and outsiders and non-agricultural purposes. This type has continued and accelerated in the post-independence period and has affected both tribals and non-tribals. The majority of such alienation is illegal and methods include collusive title suits, collusive restoration suits in SAR courts, Chapar Bandi, Sada Patta, marrying tribal women, starting commercial enterprises with Adivasis as sleeping partners, manipulating land records, and even forcible occupation of Adivasi island. Second one is alienation in rural areas. Here it is basically to meet the day-to-day needs of cash-strapped poor Adivasi. In the absence of active land markets in rural areas, people resort to illegal mortgages and at time outright sales. These have also been cases in which Adivasi land given to the Bhudan Yagyan committee has been transferred to non-Adivasi riayats, and where pradhans or the village headmen have settled lands on non-Adivasi or riayats from other villages for small considerations. The third point is tribal to non-tribal alienation, and the last one is tribal to tribal alienation. Now we'll discuss about the institutional alienation. The state under the guise of public purposes has been alienating tribals from their lands with some workable estimates are available. These projects include industry, mining, sanctuaries, dams, etc. The lands taken under these public purposes are both for big and medium projects. The acquisition could have a rehabilitation package where tribal habitations are disturbed, or only cash compensation for small land acquisition where tribal habitation are not being disturbed. Sharan in 2005 note that these land acquisition for public purposes and rehabilitation or resettlement have been an issue for the Adivasis of Jharkhand as well as other parts of country, leading to agitations. The major issues in these public acquisitions are disputes regarding land rights, both within and outside the family, delays compensation, inadequate compensations for land and home structures, callous rehabilitation, virtually no compensation for the commons, non-consultative and non-participative acquisition and resettlements are commonplace in Jharkhand. More land than required has been acquired. The misinterpretation of the word public purpose and the use of land acquired for purposes other than the one intended or notified are also important issues. The communities and their customary rights have been by and large and ignored in the state. A wide-scale degradation of land use to mining and quarrying has affected even those whose lands are not acquired but who are affected by the wider health and environmental impacts on these processes. Now, there are various causes of land alienation. Other causes include land record. State land records have not been upgraded and digitalized. The tribals, in the absence of mutilation of land record papers, are alienated from their land. One of the major reasons for non-restoration of illegally alienated land has been that the records are either missing or they have been mutilated deliberately in many cases. This, particularly in the urban areas, makes it difficult for Adivasi to prove their claim on land. Another factor is credit needs. The short-term needs of tribals are normally met by mortgaging the land to money lenders from where the tribals can never recover. Then there is a problem of alcoholism and gambling, which we tend to assign under social evils. For example, the cockfight, Habba Dabba, that is a form of gambling, and drinking is quite common in the village markets of Jharkhand. The scholars found that the local traders and non-tribal or Mahajans have used this weakness to alienate the tribals of their land. In a very limited number of cases, it has been reported that land is alienated to meet the fines imposed by the community. Another factor is the development of agriculture and irrigational facilities. Most tribals come under the category of marginal farmers, and their lands are non-sustainability with low returns coming from agriculture. Hence, their shock-bearing ability in case of crop loss is very low, leading them into debt, resulting in them mortgaging their land. Absence of irrigation adds to their woes, as they are dependent on rains, leading to monocropping. An increase in irrigation facilities would reduce the need for a non-institutional credit, which is a major source debt and hence alienation of land. Another important factor for land alienation is poverty and marginalization. One of the scholar in her paper, she specified the tribals of Kerala and found that extreme levels of poverty, deprivation and vulnerability of high levels of exclusion, both developmental and social, extremely low levels of empowerment, political, social and economic, rapid marginalization due to unfair, unequal and exploitative relations of production and exchange between tribal communities and others, low level of excess of entitlements, practically zero participation in development matters, with no autonomy in any form of decision making, abnormally huge siphoning of developmental resources and benefits meant for tribal people by middlemen, poor human development with low level of literacy and access to health care, rapid alienation of assets like land, alarming depletion of social capital, especially the traditional form of organization and leadership, quick deterioration of traditional knowledge system and cultural attainments, fast increasing tendency to use tribal people as cat's paws in criminal activities like illegal distillation, cultivation of narcotic plants, stealing of forest wealth, and so on. High level of exploitation of women by outsiders, weak delivery system of public services, dependency inducing developmental programs, relying on distribution of benefits rather than building up of capabilities, implementation of ad hoc and stereotyped developmental programs in the absence of proper planning, very weak monitoring system, etc., are the problems faced by the tribal community. A quick reading of land alienation case studies from various states in India shows similar causes and strangely a uniform lack of political will to prevent the alienation of tribal lands and ameliorate their sufferings. The alienation is tied to poverty, marginalization and lack of development in a sort of a closed circle with no way out. Now let us summarize what we have discussed till now. Cochrane, quoting a statement that the problem of balancing the requirement of two legal systems, the modern and the traditional, cannot be solved by merely stating what traditional custom is and then enacting modern legalization predicted on this model to individualize the property concepts. That has nearly always been the governmental response to the problem of finding out what traditional customs are. Such information is usually obtained at the cost of ossifying the traditional system. Any legal system tends to lose its dynamism at the time of codification. One important point which is not being considered in the process of this research is that rights and interests of a family member in family property have not been fully institutionalized. Hence, any undue hesitation to equate them with foreign concepts would not only deprive them of their basic tenets but would also add to existing confusion and uncertainty now characterizing the notions of these rights and interests. He also adds that more important, the reference in modern land legislation is usually to custom rather than customs. The fact is, of course, that often traditional ways are not homogeneous. They may differ or conflict. This is why thorough mapping of an entire country is a necessary prelude to legalization, something that has not been even now done with the available technological tools like satellite mapping, computerization, etc. This done, the need for special enactments for particular regions or ethnic groups that can be assessed. Unfortunately, the mapping is seldom available and authorities have all too often a fragmentary and incomplete picture of the pattern of traditional tenure in their country. It suits the vested interest well to keep information fragmented and laws vague. This followed by involving tribals in land mapping and even acquisitions for public good is doable. However, the official insensitivity with locals and their customs doesn't help the cause, and hence the tribals don't trust surveyors and suspect the government of trying to steal their land. One solution could be involving universities and anthropologists to map local customs and make a compendium of customary land practices. This, besides a complete mapping of available land in the country with reference to a cut-off year, a sort of social impact analysis can guide public policy makers and state agencies when acquiring lands for public purposes, helping dispel the perception of the alienation felt by the tribals. The word again, alienate, means to make estranged or unfriendly. In the field of sociology, the concept of alienation has been discussed by the theorists like Durkheim, Fromm, Marx, etc. Under law, alienation of land could be understood in two different contexts. When a society, culture, colonizer, or a state takes over the land of its original inhabitants, it is said that original inhabitants have been alienated from their lands, and alienable land in the property law is the land that has the capacity to be transferred by any deed. Most of the tribes in India recognize two types of properties, that is private and community property. The cultivable land, pasture, ground, etc. belong to the community. Literature on tribals in India would reveal that one of the long-standing grievances has been the alienation of their land, and the reports received from the various states indicates that various cases of land alienation have been registered. There has been hardly any respite in post-independence India. The area, being rich in natural resources, has attracted considerable investments in mines, industries, hydel projects, irrigation and reservoirs of different sizes. The scholars found that the states that around 40% of 60 million people displaced following development projects in India are tribals. And since independence, recognizing land alienation as a major issue facing tribals, the Indian government and various state governments have passed a spate of laws and regulations to prevent land alienation of tribal lands. Few scholars also focuses on the Jharkhand tribals, categorized alienation under the 4 categories which we have discussed in the module earlier. And the state, under the guise of public purposes, has been alienating tribals from their lands, with some workable estimates are also available. Other causes of land alienation include non-upgrading and no digitalization of land records, short-term credit needs of tribals and marginalized not met, lack of development of agriculture and irrigation for the marginalized and tribals, and poverty. Thorough mapping of an entire country is a necessary prelude to legitimization, something that has not been done, which is the most important thing. And this module covers mainly the fieldwork part, which is the very essential part for an anthropologist. Thank you.